He earned more money in a single day than most people earn in a lifetime. At his peak, he was making so much cash that his accountants spent entire days counting it, only to realize they had barely made a dent. There was simply too much. Millions were hidden inside walls, buried beneath the ground, or abandoned in warehouses because there was nowhere else to put it. Some of it was even lost to time, eaten by moisture and decay. And yet, despite all that wealth and power, the most feared man in his country would eventually die alone, desperate and exposed, running across a rooftop with nowhere left to hide. This is the story of Pablo Escobar. Before the money, before the power, before his name became synonymous with fear, he was just a boy born into an ordinary family. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949, in Rio Negro, Colombia, and raised in the nearby city of Medellin. His father was a simple farmer, and his mother worked as a schoolteacher. They lived modestly, without luxury or influence. From the outside, there was nothing that suggested Pablo would one day become one of the most powerful and feared figures in modern history. But Pablo was different. Even as a child, he didn't dream of living a normal life. He didn't want to struggle the way his parents did. He didn't want to spend his life working for someone else. He wanted control. He wanted wealth. And more than anything, he wanted people to respect him. As a teenager, he began finding ways to make money outside the system. He sold stolen items, forged documents, and ran small street operations that brought in more cash than any legal job he could get at his age. These early experiences shaped him. He learned how easy it was to bend the rules, and how fear could be more effective than persuasion. He learned that people were willing to look the other way if the price was right, and that loyalty could be bought. By his early 20s, Pablo had stepped into a world that was growing faster than anyone could control. A product was becoming increasingly popular in the United States, and the demand seemed endless. While others saw risk, Pablo saw opportunity. He understood that whoever could control the supply would control unimaginable wealth. Unlike many others, Pablo wasn't satisfied with being a small player. He didn't want to work under anyone. He wanted to build something of his own. He began forming connections, organizing transportation routes, and creating a system that allowed his operation to expand rapidly. He wasn't just participating in the business. He was transforming it into something far bigger and far more efficient. Within a few years, his operation was generating millions. The money flowed constantly, faster than anyone could count it. Pablo had become the leader of what would later be known as the Medellin Cartel, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. At its peak, it was responsible for supplying the vast majority of that white powder entering the United States. The wealth Pablo accumulated was beyond comprehension. He owned enormous estates, private planes, luxury cars, and entire properties built purely for his own enjoyment. One of his most famous estates, known as Hacienda Napoles, included a private zoo filled with exotic animals, a racetrack, and its own airstrip. It was less like a home and more like a kingdom. But what made Pablo different from others like him wasn't just his wealth. It was his strategy. He believed in two simple options when dealing with people: silver or lead. In other words, you could accept his money or face the consequences. Many chose the money. Those who didn't often disappeared. This approach allowed him to maintain control over police officers, politicians, and anyone else who stood in his way. And yet, despite his brutality, Pablo also built an image as a man of the people. He invested millions into poor neighborhoods in Medellin. He built houses for families who had nothing. He funded football fields and public spaces. To many of the poor, he wasn't a villain. He was a hero. A man who gave them hope in a system that had abandoned them. This dual identity made him even more powerful. He wasn't just feared. He was protected. At one point, Pablo became so influential that he was elected to Colombia's Congress in 1982. It was a shocking moment. A man who had built his empire in the shadows was now stepping into the political spotlight. He dreamed of gaining legitimacy, of transforming himself into a respected public figure. But his past couldn't stay hidden forever. Journalists began investigating him. Evidence started to surface. His true empire was exposed to the world. Soon, the government could no longer ignore what he had become. Pressure began building, not just from Colombia, but from the United States. They wanted him captured and extradited. Pablo knew that being sent to an American prison would mean the end of everything. He would lose his power, his freedom, his empire. So he made a decision. He would fight back. What followed was a period of violence that shook an entire nation. Explosions, assassinations, and chaos became part of daily life. The government declared him the most wanted man in the country. Special units were created with one goal: find Pablo Escobar. But Pablo was always one step ahead. He had safe houses everywhere. He had loyal men willing to risk everything for him. And he had money. Endless money. Enough to buy information, protection, and time. Eventually, in a shocking twist, Pablo made an offer to the Colombian government. He agreed to surrender, but only under one condition. He would build and stay in his own prison. Unbelievably, the government accepted. The prison, known as La Catedral, was less like a prison and more like a luxury resort. It was located on a mountainside with a perfect view of the city below. Inside, Pablo had everything he wanted: comfortable rooms, entertainment, and complete control over who entered and left. Even while officially imprisoned, he continued running his empire. But this arrangement couldn't last forever. Eventually, the government realized their mistake. They planned to transfer him to a real prison. Pablo found out before they could act. And he escaped. Once again, he became a ghost. But this time, things were different. His empire was weakening. His allies were disappearing. His enemies were multiplying. The government had formed a special task force dedicated solely to finding him. They used advanced technology, intelligence networks, and relentless pursuit. For over a year, Pablo was constantly on the run. He moved from place to place, never staying anywhere for long. He was no longer living in luxury. He was surviving. The man who once had everything was now hiding. On December 2, 1993, just one day after his 44th birthday, Pablo made a mistake. He stayed on a phone call too long. Authorities were able to trace his location to a house in Medellin. Within minutes, forces surrounded the building. Pablo tried to escape. He ran to the rooftop, hoping to reach the neighboring buildings. But there was nowhere left to go. Moments later, gunshots rang out. And just like that, the empire ended. The boy who once dreamed of becoming someone important had achieved more power than anyone could have imagined. He had built an empire worth billions. He had controlled governments, inspired loyalty, and created fear across continents. But in the end, none of it saved him. He died the same way he had lived. Running. Today, Pablo Escobar remains one of the most infamous figures in history. To some, he was a ruthless criminal who caused unimaginable suffering. To others, he was a symbol of rebellion against a broken system. But his story carries a deeper truth. Power built on fear never lasts forever. And no matter how high someone rises, there is always a fall waiting at the end. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos. You can also share your opinion in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye.